Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coffee and Real Estate Live Chat for August of 2024. We're just kicking off the pre-show. I'm just getting everything set up here. Feel free to ask any pre-show questions you might have. I'd be happy to answer anything you might be interested in talking about. We're going to check on how well we're streaming to all the various platforms. So we'll do that real quick here. And there we go. Let's see if the audio is working. Yep, that's working just fine. I just wrapped up, I just got home this week, a 4,000-mile road trip. So if you'd like to chat about any of that, I'd be happy to discuss that with you. I'm not seeing it up on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is usually working, so I'm not real sure what's going on there. Let's see here. Yeah, it's still not showing the video. So LinkedIn may be out. LinkedIn just may not work today. And then we'll also check on X and see what's going there. Looks like it's having trouble loading on X. There it is. It is going. All right. We are up on all the places that matter. Facebook obviously is the primary home of the show, but I like to reach out to as many folks as possible. We've got about 13 minutes till the show proper starts, but we've got some interesting data. We've got some cool discussions to have around cities with where the prices are falling the fastest, and there is California, local, right here in the Bay Area, a city that is represented in these numbers. I think that's kind of interesting. Also, some cities that we've talked about in previous Coffee and Real Estates, and also in my podcast about areas of opportunity, areas that were good for you to consider if you're someone who wanted to look into starting your investment career in real estate. But lots of interesting notes here. And we'll cover all of that stuff today, in addition to covering the usual market data for Santa Clara County, San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. And of course, if you're interested in buying, selling, investing in real estate, I'd love for you to give me an opportunity to throw my hat in the ring. Just consider me someone to interview for the job, and I'd be happy to discuss with you how I do things and how I feel like I do things differently than most other agents do. And then, of course, the other really big bit of news is how the real estate world of commissions has changed as of August 17th. The way it's been done forever is over. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm a guy who enjoys having more options and whatnot. But what they've done is completely trashed the old way and replaced it with a new way. And it's going to be chaotic. My guess it's going to be ridiculously chaotic, and some of the things that are going to exist out there as it relates to buyers are going to be horrible. We can talk about that too. I do still plan on doing a podcast dedicated to that subject. Now, I did do a podcast on this subject a few months back, but I want to do an updated one to basically get into the actual things that you as a buyer need to think about, sort of a step-by-step guide. How do you survive the new reality? Because it primarily affects you. The way the new system works is listing agents who are listing a home for sale are no longer going to offer compensation to buyer's agents. So you as a buyer are going to be faced with some interesting things if you want to work with a real estate agent. And I realize I'm a real estate broker. I've been doing this since 1988, so I obviously have a bias. But if anybody needs a real estate agent in a real estate transaction, it's the buyer. The bottom line is that a good real estate agent is going to be a great insurance policy for you or a great advisor for you as you go through the process, in terms of hopefully your agent is walking through the house and noting areas of concern. Maybe it's a crack in the foundation, or it is something that doesn't seem right, or and obviously agents are not contractors, but when it comes to suggestions to make relating to inspections to get, those are things I know I do. If something doesn't feel right, and when you've walked through hundreds and hundreds of homes and seen the follow-up inspection reports that then reveal the problems, as you digest that stuff, you get a sense for things that need to be looked at. So your real estate agent can be a huge insurance policy for you in terms of avoiding either a bad purchase or identifying shortcomings with the property that you can then use as a negotiation tool, or that at least you're aware of, right? So that when I buy this house, this is a thing I'm probably going to need to fix, or this is a thing I need to fix, but I don't need to fix it immediately. I can live with this for a year or two, and watch enough YouTube videos to do it myself or whatever. As always, while we're definitely here to enjoy some real estate chat, we're also here to enjoy coffee. So I hope you've got your favorite blend right in front of you. I do. Mine turned out great this morning. And for those of you who've been participating in coffee and real estate for however many years I've been doing it, I think I have hit my magic groove here. I make my own. I'm more of a mocha guy. I'm not a fan of just straight coffee. For me, coffee is a caffeine delivery system. So I try to make it taste as good as I possibly can, but without adding sugar and all this other stuff. So I have all these elements that I've checked to make sure are like keto friendly, I guess is the best way to put it. So I use these substitutes, and I use cocoa and not cocoa, or cacao, excuse me, because that's healthy, but the other stuff isn't, because this stuff isn't sweetened. But I made one this morning that is maybe the best one ever. Maybe the best one ever I've ever made, without using the stuff that's got all the other things in it that potentially are supposed to be not great for you. But we can talk about pretty much anything you like. Facebook is obviously the best place to chat back and forth. I've got the chat window open there. I've also got it, I believe, if you chat in on YouTube, it'll also come through. LinkedIn normally comes in. I don't think LinkedIn does come in. I think LinkedIn doesn't. But or I guess you won't see my replies, I think is how that works. But feel free to join me and ask any questions in the comments. The comments will appear on the screen that's streaming as well. So if you are asking questions, if you're on YouTube and someone asks a question on Facebook, you're obviously not going to see it, but you'll see the text on the screen if you're watching visually. And of course, I'll read off anything someone asks and then answer it verbally during the stream. So feel free to bring your questions, whatever those might be. If we're focusing more on actions, right? So here we are in August, and this is the time when, if you're looking to sell a property, you should probably start thinking sales thoughts, right? If you're thinking about going on the market, even though we're almost 6 months away from when you'd probably go on the market, because I'd usually, depending on where you are, right? It's a movable date. But if you're completely flexible, I like March, April in general. The way the market's been historically, a lot of folks will say May is the time to go on the market. I've found that to not necessarily be true, depending on your price point and where you're physically located. That number changes. Statistically, the month that you get the biggest payoff is June, but keep in mind that's deceptive. That implies that you need to go on the market in June, which the reality is you need to go on the market earlier, and you need to go into contract the month before, right? Because any sales numbers you see for June actually represent accepted offers from the previous month, right? So I find people making those kinds of small errors if they're totally able to adjust how they're going to approach the sale of their home from a whatever gives me the best outcome kind of standpoint, they'll overlook that kind of subtle stuff that you don't really know unless you've been doing this for a while. In any event, as I was saying, relating to the changes relating to not interest rates, the changes relating to commissions, buyers are going to have to be a whole lot more conscientious, because now the first thing is that if you call an agent to view a house, they're going to make you sign a piece of paper immediately. They're going to make you sign a piece of paper called a buyer-broker agreement. And you need to be there are definitely things you need to do as a buyer to protect yourself. If you sign that thing without reading it, you potentially commit yourself to working with that agent, period. So if you want to view a property and you've encountered an agent, it does not make sense for you to commit to working with an agent you know nothing about, right? And if all you've done is call them and say, I want you to get me into a house, you probably don't want to commit to that agent. But that's not going to be their opening salvo, right? The opening salvo is going to be, here's a document for you to sign where you commit to working with me to find a home and purchase it. And in addition, you're going to pay me 2% of the purchase price, or 3%, or 1.5%, whatever the number is. And you're on the hook for that. And there are ways you can get off the hook for that, but those aren't guaranteed. And it means that not only are you on the hook for that amount of money, but now you have to work with this agent for whatever home you choose. So you need to be smart relating to these buyer-broker agreements. You need to go in there and say, okay, I'll sign a buyer-broker agreement with you, but only for the specific house you're showing me. In other words, in that buyer-broker agreement, I want it to say, I want the specific address of what you're showing me being noted as the only property that I'm committing to. And even then, you're committing to then purchasing, if you decide to purchase that home, to purchase it with that agent. And if you don't sign it, according to the way this new method of doing things is being laid out, you don't get in the house. It looks like Facebook may have just stalled here. The streamers, oh, there we go. Okay, it started back up. I don't know if that was a hiccup. I don't know if you guys saw that hiccup. I see I've got a couple of folks on a couple of different platforms who are currently watching. Thanks for joining me for the pre-show. We're about 3 minutes away from starting the official show. If those of you currently tagging along in the pre-show have any questions, feel free to ask them. Happy to either just, if I know the answer, I'll just give you an answer, or if not, we can explore potential answers to your questions together and come up with something to at least give you something to track to in the event we don't have that right. I know, and of course, I'm never short on an opinion on something, so I'll be happy to offer that, if nothing else. I hope everything is beautiful where you are. I know I'm right here in Morgan Hill, and the weather's been amazing this morning. Driving that 4,000-mile road trip was a shocker. The end point of the road trip was Houston, Texas. I was driving my son, who moved there to attend law school at the University of Houston. So, go Cougars, I guess, is what I'm supposed to say whenever I say that. But anyway, so that trip was insane. Did the extreme southern route where we hugged the Mexico border for a while, which was super interesting. And then on the way back, I went a little bit north and came back and ended up going through Flagstaff. And there are just some beautiful places out there, but also some things that kind of shocked me, particularly in West Texas, where there were so many cities where half of the properties on the main drag were either all boarded up or were literally physically collapsing in on themselves. And these looked like communities that had been pretty robust. You know, they seemed to have a lot of infrastructure. I wasn't real sure what happened there. I mean, obviously the first guess is loss of jobs. Clearly is usually one of the first things that'll kill a small town. But these sort of ranked in my mind a little higher than simply being a small town. These looked like some pretty big places. So I was a little shocked there. Something I might want to look into maybe at some point. But a lot of beautiful areas too. The hill country of Texas and West Texas, is stunning. And I don't think a lot of people expect to see those kinds of woods and hills in Texas. I think they expect to see a lot more scrub and more desert and cactus looking stuff. So, and I'd been there before and kind of knew it was there, but to see it and be reminded of how beautiful it is was a cool experience. And then Flagstaff is just stunning. No matter whether you're approaching it from the east or the west, you're in desert and it's 100 degrees, and then suddenly you're hitting mountains and trees and the temperature drops 20 to 25 degrees and it's beautiful. And that's kind of what Flagstaff has going for it. And that actually holds true even going south towards Prescott, Arizona from Flagstaff. So, all right, it has clicked over to 10 a.m. It is time to officially start the August 2024 Coffee and Real Estate Live chat. I thank those of you who chose to join me during the pre-show, which we kind of spent a little time just talking about whatever. Of course, you can ask any questions you like using the chat box there. In some cases, you can't. It won't work at all, right? It'll work. There's no chat option on things like YouTube. But if you wanted to ask questions directly, I know you can do it. On X, there's no direct way to ask questions. But on things like YouTube and Facebook, you can absolutely join in. Now, before, when I checked, LinkedIn wasn't working. I think it should be working now. No. Not sure what's going on. LinkedIn appears to still not be up and running. So we're just going to have to move on because LinkedIn's not happening. But feel free to ask any questions you might have. And as we go through this, what happens is that right here, right there, you will see any questions that come up will pop up there. So you can see the text of the question regardless of what platform you're on. And then, of course, I'll read off the question that someone might ask. Now, what we're going to do is start off with the data, which is what we usually do, right? What were the numbers in July? And we're just going to run through those. You know what? Let me put my ugly face up there because that's usually a better spot. And remember, when we start, what we do is we compare this month in this year to the same month last year. We just want to get that year-over-year comparison because it eliminates any seasonal influences, right? A November or a December is very different from a January or a February, and you'll even see that in the numbers as we look through these. But just so that you're calibrated to what we're talking about here. Now, to start off, let's talk about total homes on the market. So this number represents, as sellers, what was your competition? How many other homes were out there on the marketplace looking for buyers' attention to get sold? And for buyers, this is the amount of choice you had. How many homes did you have to choose from in today's market? And in Santa Clara County overall, and I like to start with the county, we sort of work down in terms of size of the market, right? Santa Clara County obviously is going to be the biggest market because all of these cities are in Santa Clara County. San Jose is the next biggest, and then Morgan Hill is one of my favorite markets. I happen to live in Morgan Hill. And then Gilroy is sort of the furthest south you can go. And I think it's good to sort of get those outliers. And because Gilroy also tends to represent a lot of appeal for folks who are trying to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of their home purchasing power. So let's go ahead and get started here. Now, last year, in July of 2023, we had 1,126 homes, and we've had a 50% increase since that time. In July of 2024, we had 1,687 homes on the market in Santa Clara County. That's huge, right? We've been arguing that the big thing in this current market has been relating to inventory. Inventory has been telling the story. What I find interesting is that what you will see out there from the talking heads, of which I guess I am one today, they want to explain this with interest rates. Totally not the reason. Well, not totally not the reason. I'm sure in some cases it is the reason. But what I have found with interest rates is interest rates don't stop buyers from buying. It tends to suppress the amount buyers will pay for a home. So, you know, that at least that's been my experience. And I right now, when I checked this morning, I currently have about 120 active buyers, meaning they subscribe to a search that is run specifically for what they're interested in, and they're checking the results of that search every single day. And then I've got about another 300 that are more casual, maybe check in every couple of weeks. And those are folks maybe who are just getting an idea of what home prices are doing in various areas. Maybe they're waiting for a time for them to come into the market. But what I have found is that the biggest problem for buyers has been inventory, and we're starting to see that getting solved in every market to pretty huge numbers. So let's go ahead and talk about San Jose, next biggest market, up 54% from the same time last year. 528 homes last year, 813 homes this year. In Morgan Hill, we had a 28% increase, 67 homes last year, 86 homes this year. Gilroy, 52% increase, 61 homes last year, 93 homes this year. So across the board, we are seeing dramatic increases in inventory. Now, nationally, according to the National Association of Realtors, in July, inventory was up 35.5%. So you can see, with the only exception being Morgan Hill, we are way blowing out the national number in terms of the increase in inventory with what we're seeing in Santa Clara County, San Jose, and Gilroy. So this feeds quite a few things, and we're going to talk more about those numbers as we move through this. But this is where I wanted to pause for a minute and just emphasize how important it is that these inventory numbers are doing what they're doing. Next, let's go ahead and talk about new listings. These are homes that went on the market in the month of July. So sellers decided to list their home for sale. Now in Santa Clara County, that number's up 35%. There was 1,074 last year, 1,448 this year. So we're seeing a big uptick in the number of sellers who are wanting to jump into the marketplace. Anecdotally, in my business, I have gotten far more inquiries in terms of folks wanting to talk about potentially listing their home for sale. And also the tool that I offer to homeowners that gives you an instant value estimation of your home, usage of that really jumped over the last couple of months. So all indicators, both my anecdotal ones and the larger statistical ones, show a heightened level of interest on the part of sellers to potentially liquidate their property. San Jose is up 34%, so very much on par with the county numbers. 537 homes last year, 721 homes this year listed and put on the market. Morgan Hill up 22%, 50 last year, 61 this year. Gilroy, 71% increase in the total number of homes added to the market. 42 last year, 72 this year. That is a huge number. You blend that with the fact that they've had such a dramatic increase in active listings overall, and it represents, I think, an opportunity for buyers. And we're going to see that there are some other stats that also bolster the idea that you can move into the market in Gilroy and potentially get yourself a much better deal than you're going to be able to get in other markets. Okay. Next, let's talk about the total number of homes sold. And in doing this, I also want to consider the idea of, with these number of homes sold, are we overall adding homes to the overall inventory, or are we removing homes from the inventory? Meaning, are we selling more homes than were listed in the same period of time? So let's, and I don't, no spoilers, but I'm going to be willing to bet that you can guess where we're at with this one. So the total number of homes sold last year at this time, 879. This year, 1,111. That's a 26% jump from the same time last year. San Jose up 26%, same percentage jump. 433 homes last year, 544 homes this year. Morgan Hill up 13%, 40 homes last year, 45 homes this year. And Gilroy up 18%, 33 homes last year, 39 homes this year. So a few things to keep in mind. Clearly, the number of homes being added to the market and the existing inventory is really going to accumulate in Gilroy as percentage increases just aren't keeping up in terms of homes sold, are not keeping up with the number of homes being added to the marketplace. But let's quantify that. So in Santa Clara County overall, we added, if you just take the total number of homes listed versus the total number of homes sold, we sold far fewer homes than we listed, right, to the tune of 337. So overall in the month of July, we added 337 homes to the overall market in Santa Clara County. In San Jose, we added 177 homes. In Morgan Hill, we added 16 homes. And in Gilroy, we added a whopping 33 homes. Now, given the size of the Gilroy market, I know 33 sounds like a small number, but given the size of the market in Gilroy, that is a huge number. So just something to keep in mind as we realize the inventory number is what tells the story in terms of how things are going to go, and at what point do we outstretch demand, right? It's a supply and demand discussion, and usually when we start to see, almost always when we start to see the supply rise up so much, it meets or exceeds demand. When it exceeds demand, that's when you suddenly start to see homes not selling for over asking price, tending to sell below asking price. And we've got an interesting piece of data here that the folks over at Bigger Pockets put out in an article that we're going to look at once we start looking at recent internet articles. That's kind of interesting. So stick around for that. So let's go ahead and look at months of inventory. Now, months of inventory is this concept where we freeze the total number of homes in the market, right? The total inventory of homes. And we take the total number of homes that sold in that same month, and we do the math to figure out how long would it take us to sell all of the current inventory at current home sales rates, which gives us a month, right? An amount of time. So in Santa Clara County, it's up 15% from the same time last year. Last year, it was taking 1.3 months to sell off the inventory. It's 1.5 months today in July of 2024. In San Jose, it was 1.2 months last year, 1.5 months this year, so that's a 25% increase. Morgan Hill, 1.7 months of inventory. Last year, 1.9, that's a 12% increase. And Gilroy, check this one out, 1.8 months last year, 2.4 months this year. This is a perfect demonstration of how much inventory has increased, right? Because as this inventory number increases, the amount of time it takes to sell it off is also increasing because the sales aren't keeping up with the increase in inventory. So it was a 33% increase in Gilroy. That's a crazy number. But also keep in mind that that's still not a balanced market. Nationally, a balanced market is considered 4 to 5 months of inventory. I would say here in the Silicon Valley area, that number leans more towards 4 months. If we start to hit 4 months, 3.5, 4 months, that tends to be a little bit more balanced in my mind. But all of these numbers that we've hit, the tenor that we've established with the numbers we've looked at so far should be telling you, if I really want to live in the Bay Area and I still consider Gilroy to be in the Bay Area, that might be a good place for me to start looking. There are some great neighborhoods in Gilroy, right near Christopher High School in Northwest Gilroy. If you're someone who's looking at a slightly higher price point, that's interested in land and something bigger, something that leans a little bit more into the luxury lifestyle, Northeast Gilroy is amazing, where there's tons of properties on acreage that are just beautiful. So, and I happen to know some builders who live there and have built amazing homes in those neighborhoods. Okay, now let's move on to pending and contingent. Now, this is an interesting number. This is a crystal ball number, right? This tells us how many homes in the month of July accepted an offer, meaning they went from being active to being pending or contingent in the month of July. So they accepted an offer. They're not sold yet, but they've accepted an offer. So what we will likely see is that in August, anything that got an offer accepted in July is likely going to close in August. The vast majority of them will probably close in August. So what are we seeing in terms of accepted offers? Well, in Santa Clara County, last year it was 898. This year it's 1,086 for a 21% increase. If we look at that number, I think that number is a little low compared to the other numbers that we've been seeing in terms of what have we got in terms of inventory, et cetera. What are home sales looking like? This is a number that tends to telegraph to me that we're not going to see as much of an increase in home sales next month as we would expect to see given the other increases in things like home inventory and new listings. So I don't think we're going to see suddenly next month more homes are getting sold than getting listed, for instance. But we'll see. In San Jose last year, it was 454 homes in July. This year in 2024, it's 543. That's a 20% increase in the same time last year. In Morgan Hill, we saw 29 homes last year went pending in the month of July, and it's up 31% this year to 38 homes. In Gilroy, we saw 41 homes go pending last year, 50 homes this year for a 22% increase. So in Morgan Hill, we definitely saw a pretty dramatic uptick in the number of homes that went pending. What we'll also see is some other interesting news in terms of price reductions, and that's a number that we track to figure out how many homes in the various markets have actually had to do price reductions in that same period of time. And we'll talk about that one in a few minutes. Next, let's talk about original list price. Now, this is one of my favorites. This is one I do. I don't know any other agents who actually even talk about this number. I like this number because there's a psychological element to it. It's a way for you to get a feel for what sellers are calibrated to. By original list price, what I mean is when the home was first listed in the MLS, this is the price that was entered. This is before there were any price increases or reductions. This is what sellers in their head were willing to say, I'm willing to sell my home for this amount of money. They were willing to sign on the dotted line and commit to putting this price out as what they will sell their home for. So I think it's a great way to get calibrated to what sellers are willing to take, right? And what they think their home is worth. So this is a perception number. It's not necessarily a reality number, but I think it's a good one to keep in mind, particularly when and I always do this in the pre-offer stage where I'm trying to figure out, where was this seller originally calibrated to? Have there been price reductions or increases since they started the listing on this home? What wiggle room do I have that I can exercise on behalf of my buyer to try to get a lower price for my folks? So it's just good numbers to have. So in Santa Clara County, not a big change. It's a 2.8% change, but last year it was $1,848,000. This year it's $1,899,000. So it's still an increase, but it's not huge. And there have been years where we have seen double-digit increases in Santa Clara County overall, over 10%. In terms of expectations, what sellers were expecting to get. And it wasn't horribly uncommon just a few months ago to see Morgan Hill in double digits as well, where expectations were particularly high. Usually when the numbers get that crazy, if the market's not there to meet that craziness, we start to see price reductions happening. So you can usually see those two things going hand in hand. San Jose is interesting, a 5.8% increase. So 1,368,000, almost 1,369,000 last year, 1,448,000 this year. So a pretty substantial increase in expectations on the part of sellers in San Jose. In Morgan Hill, we've got 1,518,000 versus 1,620,000. That's a 6.7% increase. So again, expectations elevated from the same time last year. Gilroy up 3.3%, 1,273,000 last year, 1,315,000 this year. We'll look at and see how this compares to sales numbers. In fact, we're going to compare the sales numbers to the original list price numbers to see how far off were expectations of sellers from what they actually really got in July. I think that's an interesting one to look at, and we'll see two areas where they didn't really get what they thought they were going to get. So, all right, so here we are. Now, on average sales price in Santa Clara County, it's up 9.6%, so almost 10%. $1,774,849 versus $1,944,951. That's the average sale price in the entire county. And what we find is that on average, sellers got more than they expected, to the tune of $45,572. Which would tend to feed this idea that multiple offers are coming in. And we've got data coming that we're going to review here in a minute that is another piece of data to confirm that. Because remember, these are expectations versus the reality of the month. And this is the reality. And the reality exceeded expectations. In San Jose, it was up 4.9%, 1,441,367 last year, 1,512,713 this year. And if we look at that exceeded expectations to the tune of about, on average, $64,204. So sellers tended to get more than they expected from their properties in San Jose on average. Now things take a little bit of a switch here. We've got Morgan Hill, where last year, on average, homes sold for $1,296,324. This year, $1,521,309. Now, and as we move down this list, I don't think you need to really hem and haw over San Jose or Santa Clara County because the volume of sales is there to make it okay. But once you get down to places like Morgan Hill and Gilroy, you have to also kind of wrap your head around the idea that in some months you simply have more expensive properties that are coming onto the marketplace and selling that can skew these numbers. And one very expensive home can do it. If you've got one $5 or $6 million home that sells in a place like Morgan Hill or Gilroy. Now, I usually correct for that kind of stuff here just so we can try to wrap our head around what the real numbers are for the community. In this case, these are legitimate, I think reflective of what the market is actually doing. The desirability of Morgan Hill is just high. That's just a reality. And then we're going to see here in a minute that things actually went down a little bit for Gilroy. But anyway, so 17.4% increase in Morgan Hill. And overall, that did not meet expectations. In other words, the average original list price, what sellers thought they should get, was less than what was more than what they actually got. So in Morgan Hill, that number came to $99,120. So almost $100,000 below expectations for the folks in Morgan Hill. In Gilroy, we saw a drop. $1,203,940 last year, $1,180,039 in July of 2024. That's, again, a 2% drop and represents $135,655 below expectations on average for the city of Gilroy in terms of what folks are getting for their properties. This is all interesting stuff, and particularly if you're a buyer trying to formulate an offer, right? So I have on many, particularly if I'm going aggressive on going below asking price on a property. And of course, lots of other stuff needs to happen. I need to assess what are the probabilities of multiple offers, and not just in Gilroy, but say in that neighborhood, and it applies everywhere, Morgan Hill, San Jose, Santa Clara, in that neighborhood, because there are San Jose neighborhoods where literally you cross a street and these houses are all going to get multiple offers. They're going to sell ridiculously quick. Over here, not so much. These could stay on the market for a year. So things like days on, how long has this property been on the market? All these things will factor in terms of how aggressive you can get with a price. I find most sellers aren't mentally ready to accept a much lower than asking price offer until they've been on the market for at least 30 days. In many markets, and some markets a little bit less than that. But you can also kind of, if you have an interaction with some of these folks in terms of the seller's agent and those kinds of things, you can get a feel for where the seller is at least you hope you can, or sniff out any baloney that's being thrown your way relating to that discussion. But in any event, this is where we stand in terms of what average sales prices are doing. And again, yet another piece of data that I think reflects positively on buyers showing some interest in Gilroy. I think Gilroy continues to be, and I've been saying that for months now. This has got to be at least the 6th month where I've called out data that indicates Gilroy is a very positive place for folks to consider moving. I think there's some great neighborhoods too that you can look at where this is true. All right. Next, percent over or under asking price. This is an interesting one because clearly the more over asking price you're seeing, the more competitive the market, right? Because why would someone pay 5% over asking price unless there's other people bidding on the same thing, right? So this will also be an indicator, as I alluded to earlier, of multiple offers. But take a look at this trend overall. In every market compared to the same time last year, this number is down. Now, in some areas, it's still up at a crazy amount over a full asking price. But in every case, the trend shows us this is declining. And remember, this is year over year, so no seasonal stuff. In the county overall, 0.7% down from the same time last year. So last year, we saw homes selling for 104.9%, which basically means that homes were selling for almost 5% over asking price, so 4.9% over asking price. That's down to 4.2% over asking price today. San Jose, 105.6% last year. So 5.6% over asking price. And, I've been doing this for a super long time, and I can remember days when we were seeing, and you'll see them in the chart I'm going to show you here in a minute, where there were times when these numbers were 110%, just crazy numbers. Anyway, 104% now, so a 1.6% net drop in this number. In Morgan Hill, it's down 0.3%, 101.7% last year, 101.4%, so just 1.4% over asking price. And remember, this is an average. And there are absolutely properties in all of these areas that actually sold for under asking price. So, and as we get closer and closer to that equilibrium of getting asking price, the number of properties that you're finding that sell for below asking is increasing in most marketplaces, which I think reflects an opportunity. Now, and of course, as we go through here, we can see one of the best opportunities, again, is in Gilroy, where last year they're at 102.2. This year they're at 100.5. So on average, homes are selling for half a percentage point over asking price. That's a 1.7% delta from last year. So overall, they've lost 1.7% over asking price number for Gilroy. And again, just reinforces this idea that if you need to buy and you want to get in on a marketplace that I think is the most lucrative for buyers in terms of bang for the buck, I think it's hard to argue with Gilroy. If you're someone who has a higher tolerance for homes that need work, obviously we can move further north. We can move to San Martin. We can move to Morgan Hill. We can move to South San Jose. There are definitely some neighborhoods that are overall nice, but what you're looking for is the worst house in the neighborhood. And if you're willing to take that kind of stuff on, you can get that better deal, but with the understanding that you may have to address things immediately to make the home livable for you. But at least over time, there's things you're going to have to do or invest some sweat equity to kind of recover from that. Okay, let's take a look. I believe the next one is days on market. This is how long it's been taking properties to sell. And as I always mention, once we get over about 15 to 17 days on this number, it's a real number. And I say that because normally when an agent lists a home for sale, in the listing, they will say, we're not looking at offers until such and such a date, which is usually 10 to 14 days after the home's been on the market. Why? Because they want to have at least one open house and preferably two open houses or 2 weekends of open houses out there for people to be able to come in and look at the house. Here in Santa Clara County overall, 18 days, which tends to imply that homes are not selling immediately, but within a few days of what would be quote unquote immediately, right? If we assume that all of those homes were waiting at least 14 days before they'd even accept anyone submitting an offer. It's a 0% change from the same time last year. Same number of days to get sold as it was last year. San Jose, the same thing. Yeah, and I double checked. Whenever I see numbers like this, I'm like, oh, let me make sure. But yeah, 17 days in San Jose to get sold in July, both in 2023 and 2024. Where we start to see differences is Morgan Hill. Morgan Hill had an interesting summer last year. Much more of a depressed summer, but they've dropped from 25 days last year in July to 17 days this year. That's a 32% drop. And Morgan Hill had a lot of interesting things. There tends to be a higher percentage of properties that are priced at the higher price point in Morgan Hill. And when we had those interest rates really go up in August, at the beginning of August, the beginning of July, there was a big jump in interest rates, and that really suppressed the market for a while. I think it was June. So that was something that hit and caused a extension to the number of days on market for Morgan Hill in the past few months. Gilroy saw a 6% increase, the only community in the ones we check here that actually saw an increase in the number of days on market. So it went from 16 days last year to 17 days this year. Given the size of the sample, I would call that right down the middle. Because of the small sample size, I would simply say it's about the same as it was last year. But given the other data that we've seen as it relates to what's happening with percent above asking price, relationship of asking price to sales price, we are still seeing a trend that indicates it's taking more for homes to get sold in Gilroy, putting a little bit more power in the hands of the buyers. All right, next, let's take a look. Now we're not looking at year over year. Now, the red bars represent the same month in previous years. So you can see July of 2022, July of 2023, July of 2024. But this is now a way for us to just look over our shoulder and see what month-to-month trends we've had. And we're going to start off with total active listings. And what we want to do is say, okay, well, here's where we were in June of 2022 to July of 2022. It was relatively flat. In June of 2023 to July of 2023, it went up just a little, right? So we had flat, we had it go up a little bit. Look at how much it changed here in terms of going down. So we had our peak in May, we went down in June, and then it went down again in July. But we do always see a drop after July, with the exception of 2023, where we saw this kind of funky jump in September and October that then jumped into a decline in November and December and bottoming out in December, which is pretty typical. December's typically the bottom out month for us. But an interesting downturn in overall inventory, but still a huge increase from the same time last year. Where do I expect this to go? Well, given typical trends, I would expect it to continue to go down a little. We might see, it's really going to depend a lot on how many homes get listed in the month of August, but I would expect flat or a slight decline on this number moving forward. Next, let's take a look at the total number of new listings. We can see that we've had a pretty dramatic drop from June to July. We had our peak in May. Not horribly out of character. Again, it goes with that theory that agents tend to adhere to, and the popular opinion is that May is the time to list for getting sold. I tend to feel that depends. I think April is a little bit more, but April, May isn't bad. If we take a look at the trend in previous years, we can see it was also a decrease from June to July of 2023. In June to July of 2022, it was flat. After that, we can see that in July, it went down substantially from July to August of 2022. From July to August of 2023, it went up. So we will see. It is going to be a hard one to call. I think we have a very understandable possibility of seeing a big jump in the total number of new listings. A lot of folks are talking about recession. A lot of folks are talking about profit taking. Given the amount of people, the increased number of people I've personally had reach out to me relating to potentially selling their home, I would not be surprised if we see this number jump. And if we do, then obviously inventory numbers might go up, but it'll also be dramatically affected by the total number of purchases that happen in August and September. But it wouldn't surprise me if we see this number going up in terms of total number of homes that get listed. Next, we can take a look at the total number of homes sold and try to figure out where we might go from here. As you can see, it's a slight downturn from June to July of 2024. Dramatic downturn last year from June to July of 2023. And then in June to July of 2022, it was flat. 2022 was a funky year, though. So, I mean, a lot of the weird interest rate stuff going on. So the market, taking that as a template for a quote-unquote normal year is probably not the best way to go. Last year was a little bit more normal with some weird upticks. If I had to guess where we're going to go, in July of 2022, we saw a jump between July and August. If we look in July of 2023, we saw a jump between July 2023 and August of 2023. So I would expect homes sold to go up a bit. We saw the pending numbers were pretty good. They were up from the same time last year. So wouldn't surprise me if the home sold number stays flat or goes up a bit for August of this year. Next, let's talk about pendings. See how flat pendings are from June to July? Last year, there was a drop from June to July, and the year before that, it was a drop from June to July. And then a little bit of an uptick in August. So we'll see. My guess would be that, again, that feeds relatively flat home sales numbers. But then if these things stick, we'll see another wave of pendings happening in August. And I think one reason for that is most people consider that to be the start of the quote unquote season, right? They see fewer buyers out because most buyers want to have their purchase concluded by August for school reasons. But then there's this percentage of buyers out there that aren't constrained by whether or not school is starting. And so then they'll make offers as they see a little bit less competition. So August represents an opportunity. And as you can see, all of these pendings and things really start to drop. Even compared, if you just look at total number of active listings, it goes down. But there's definitely a sweet spot in there, like September, October, November, where if you're willing to buy in those winter months, you can find some good opportunities. What we tend to see, at least by November, is folks start taking their homes off the market, and then they'll go back on the market after the new year because they just don't want to deal with folks traipsing through their house during Thanksgiving and Christmas. So the inventory drops enough that your leverage as a buyer, the ratio of homes on the market to the number of buyers still in the marketplace searching actually will many times in many markets lean into this idea that now there's actually fewer homes per buyer out there because of the number of homes that have been pulled off the marketplace. So winter isn't, depending on the market, isn't always the best way to go in terms of finding your best deals as a buyer. But if you're shopping right, it can be, right? Particularly if you're dealing with homes that have been on the market for longer than 30 days. So, okay, next on the hit list, Santa Clara County list versus sales prices. We can see that they're sort of merging. It's always interesting when these two numbers are merging. Last month, they were diverging a little bit in June of 2024, where average sales price was a little down, but still above average list price. But now you see them converging on one another. Last year, they were relatively close in July of 2023. They were almost the same in July of 2022. Again, a weird year because of interest rates relating to mortgages, where we were up above 7%, close to 8%. And then average list price was way higher than average sales price for July of 2022 to July of 2023. Then we had weird little bits of overlap. But now we're to the point where sales prices are higher than list prices again. Will that trend continue? Judging by the direction of these two lines, I would say there's a good possibility that we see a reversal here. Check out, though, in 2023, look at the winter months where prices were substantially higher. The list prices are substantially higher than sales price. So folks were tending to pay less than what expectations were on the part of sellers. Next, percent of asking price. And we can see that, look at that, 115.3% was the peak in March of 2022. We don't really break up into the over 10% mark again after May of 2022. But remember, March is when the crazy interest rate stuff started in 2022, and it had a dramatic effect. We really saw a drop to the point where homes were selling below asking price on average in August of 2022. So interesting numbers there, where we then saw in 2023 going back up to 104.9 was the peak, and in 2024 109 is the peak. So a pretty substantial jump there. But as we can see, we've had a pretty good drop off since we hit that peak in April of 2024, down to 104.2 in July of 2024. So where would we go? If we look at July of 2023, we can see that after that, things were relatively flat and didn't really start to go back down until November, December. If we look back in July of 2022, we can see things dropped off quite a bit right after July. But again, those influences of interest rate, I think, kind of played more of a part. My guess is we'll see things being, depending, I mean, if we see huge increases in inventory, as we have a continuing increase in inventory, obviously that throws off the supply and demand curve. And if it does throw it off enough, that will directly affect this number. So it wouldn't surprise me if we do see those inventory numbers, this continues to go down to the point where it might even go below 100% again for folks that are interested in buying properties. Next, days on market. Definitely can see where the peaks are, right? In terms of days on market. It's always the end of winter. So January of 2023, January of 2022. That's when we see the big peaks in the total number of days it took. We can see the overall trend, if we're looking for that year-to-year trend, is a overall reduction in days on market. But look at how much we've seen an increase. So between June and July of 2024, really big increase compared to, say, June, July of 2023. Not as much as in June and July of 2022. But again, remember, interest rates had done their craziness in 2022. So the amount of time it was taking to get a home sold just really took a jump. So we saw days increase between July and August in 2022. We saw days to sell increase between July and August of 2023. Not so much. It's really more flat. What do I expect to see? Well, given and just if you look at the months leading up to July of 2023, you can see it fluctuates. It's relatively flat. Not relatively flat here. In April and May, it stayed about the same, but in June and July, dramatic increases in the days on market. So my take on this would be that we see either a slight slowing in the increase or another dramatic increase as we saw between June and July of 2024. So I think we see days on market continue to increase from here. Next. This is some numbers on the percent of listings with reduced prices for July of 2024. Last month, it was in Santa Clara County overall. Last month, it was 21% of homes. This month, it's 23%. And if we look at the same time last year, the year-over-year change, this number is up 72% from last year. So overall in Santa Clara County, huge numbers of homes have been getting price reductions. Again, it's only 23%, but last year at the same time, it was much below 23%. In San Jose, it's a 94% increase over the same time last year. 23% of homes had a price reduction last month, 26% this month. And Morgan Hill, we actually had a reduction. It was 25% last year, last month, 19% this month, for a 20% reduction from the same time last year. So fewer homes with price reductions the same time last year in Morgan Hill. Gilroy, 28% last month, 31% this month, 93% increase from the same time last year. So comparing it to the same time last year, we have far more homes that are having to embrace a price reduction in order to get sold before they do get sold. So interesting kind of perspective there. Again, it's just another piece of information that I think should draw buyers' attentions to Gilroy. I think there's a lot of opportunities to potentially have there. Now, at this point, what I'd love to do is, if anybody has any questions about any of the data we've talked about, feel free to throw them into the chat. I'd love to, or any observations that you have that I might have missed. And of course, since this is coffee and real estate, before we move on to the other news items or the other real estate tidbits, we have to enjoy a little coffee. As I was saying in the pre-show, this is my own concoction. It's, I buy the beans, I grind the beans, and then I make myself kind of a mocha, because for me, it's a caffeine delivery system as opposed to a love of coffee. But I kind of think I feel like I've hit my stride on the coffee in terms of being able to make it tasty enough without having all the sugar and all the other stuff in it that actually makes it delicious and still make it something that's enjoyable to drink. All right, let's go ahead and jump in here. We're going to start with what I think is an interesting little tidbit. These are areas where house prices are falling the fastest. And for some of you, these communities are going to sound familiar. There's obviously one community in there that clearly is going to catch your eye. San Jose, California is right there in the middle of the list, right there. Down 4% from the same time last year, where they say the current median is $1,469,000. In San Jose, I saw the average price in July was $1,512,000, and that includes all single-family townhouse and condominiums. So maybe they're just talking about single-family residentials. I don't know. But they indicate that it's a 4% drop. And you can see there's some other areas in there. Now, Miami, Florida is down 11.2%, biggest drop. And A lot of that can be attributed to some of the weird insurance stuff that's going on there, the hurricane stuff that's been going on in Miami. But at a median home price of $439,000, if you can iron out any insurance problems, I think Miami is a potentially, and the reason why I'm sharing this list with you is check your data and check what concerns you might have. But I think these represent potentially good places to look to for an investment. As we see a drop in the barrier to entry in terms of price. Denver's down 6.3%. Seattle's down 5.5%. Seattle's interesting. The problems in Seattle are mostly law enforcement related and that kind of stuff. I don't see that as being something that can last forever. Who knows how long it can last, but I see that as something that ultimately has to get solved. So you potentially can get yourself a good deal in a city that I think will ultimately recover from this, so that you can get that appreciation. But it could also be a great place to potentially rent. Now, one thing I'd want to check, because Seattle being Seattle, is how landlord friendly are they? Some of you know that I had investment property in Hawaii that I liquidated, not because it wasn't making money, not because it wasn't a great investment, but it was because of the amount of control that local government wanted to have over my ability to do short-term rentals on that property. They were basically making it illegal, to the point where they were going to start going through short-term rental websites, and if they found your property there, they're going to charge you $10,000 a day if they caught you advertising your place as a short-term rental. So anyway, Kansas City, Missouri. I know nothing about Kansas City, Missouri. I think I drove through there once. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. 4.3%. And these are interesting because low barriers of entry, $339,000 as a median price is kind of cool. San Jose, California, I think there is more room for that to potentially drop. We are still seeing an awful lot of people wanting to move out of the Bay Area. And again, I think I've shared this before. Anecdotally, people I talk to are, when I talk to them about what their plans are, 80% of them want to leave the state. So that is a big change from the way, like I said, I've been doing this since 1988. And for about the past 10 years, I've been seeing the numbers flip. It used to be 80% of the people who were moving were going to stay in California. Some were staying in the same city. Now 80% are leaving the whole state, enthusiastically leaving the state. Tampa, Florida. I like Tampa, Florida. I've been in Tampa, Florida. I've spent a considerable amount of time in Tampa, Florida. I like it. The fact that it's down, I think, is interesting, and potentially an opportunity. Austin, Texas, I still like. I know when on this, not this show, but on my podcast that I do, way before other folks were calling it, at least I feel like it was way before, I was calling Austin as a great investment. And then at some point we hit a price point where I said, stop looking in Austin and start looking in Round Rock, which is just north of Austin. I still feel like that's halfway decent advice. I haven't looked at those numbers in a while, but I still like Round Rock. It's just literally minutes. It's the next city north of Austin, but it borders Austin. Detroit, Michigan. I don't know enough about Detroit, but I do know there are properties you can buy there for $1 in some very bad neighborhoods. I wouldn't touch Detroit. I don't. The primary industry there was automotive. I don't see any recovery happening there. And there's nothing happening in the automotive industry today that indicates to me that there's going to be a resurgence. And if there is a resurgence, that it would have any effect on Detroit. So there you go. San Antonio, Texas. I've been there a few times. Boy, is it hot. No, thank you. But you're not going to live there, right? If you're going to invest, you potentially would just be investing and then pulling cash out in terms of rent. So that's a pretty low barrier to entry. So that might represent a good opportunity. And then Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, I've been to Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been to North Carolina in general. They used to have, I don't know if it's still a thing, a Triangle Park thing happening where they thought that was going to be the next Silicon Valley in the early 90s. Didn't really happen. But my understanding is it's got a pretty diverse economy, which I think bodes well. So again, 462. Next, I wanted to talk about the folks at Pacific Legal Foundation, just to bring your attention to it. I love these guys. So I've actually interviewed one of their lawyers. It's on one of my podcasts. If you go to soldbyrobert.com or therebelbroker.com, you can find that interview. Just do a search on Pacific Legal Foundation or whatever. But this is great. And actually, my interview related to this, my interview with them was right after they won this, that was with the lawyer who won this case in front of the Supreme Court, which I have to admit, if there is someone whose autograph I want to get, it's some of these people who work for Pacific Legal Foundation. I geek out for these folks. When my son told me he wanted to go to law school, I was like, well, hey, maybe you could intern with the Pacific Legal Foundation. Wouldn't that be awesome? And he's not having any of it. But anyway, the great thing is they've taken this from not only when they do equity theft, do they have to stop doing equity theft, but they have to repay folks who they stole the equity of their home. So, and just as a really quick reminder of what it means, and this is only in Michigan, right? There are still states where this stupid stuff is happening. What it means is that you are in arrears on your taxes. And so there is a forced sale of your property, and the state keeps all the proceeds. If you only owe $10,000 to the state, but they sell your property and they make $200,000, they keep the whole $200,000. So they steal all of your equity. The fact that this was ever considered okay or has been happening to people, it blows my mind. It is so patently wrong, immoral, and should be illegal that it blows me away conversations even need to happen about this. And it annoys me. So there you go. And it should annoy you. The idea that the government could come and say, you owe us an amount of money, you're unable to pay it, so we're going to sell your property. And then they keep all of it and not just what you're owing them. That just blows me away. All right. New residential construction slides in July. Multifamily projects lead the decline. Good. This is not a headline you should be upset about. Multifamily has dominated construction for years, by far too much. For those of you who live in Silicon Valley, you know that right along the 85, over the past 10 years, we have seen insane growth in multifamily apartment style buildings. There's one, I can't remember the name of the place, but it's right where there used to be like a rock quarry there or something. I just always remember seeing those weird elevator things that have a ramp where rocks and stuff are fed up this thing on a rolling mat thing. But anyway, and it is huge, and I cannot imagine a more stressful and annoying way to live than living in one of those gigantic multifamily units. It must be insane. I just don't get it. But anyway, so the idea that we're seeing fewer multifamily projects, I don't think is a bad thing. I would like to see a whole bunch more single family or duplexes or triplexes or quads. Because the bottom line is what was being focused on was the least desirable form of housing. And it was also the most stressful for those who live in it. As I said, I moved my son to Houston for my 4,000-mile road trip to Houston. And he now lives in an apartment complex that is just nuts. There are no elevators. And when I found out he was on the third floor and discovered there were no elevators, I was not a happy camper. So that was that was fun. But it's because you're always dealing with other people floating around. You're dealing with noises and all these kinds of things. So it's just stressful. It's annoying. It's the least desirable. And the bottom line is I am perfectly happy to see multifamily projects wane in favor of single family. So not bad news in my book. The 9 best remodeling tips to follow. So we've already talked about buyers preparing for the upcoming season, right? If you're someone who's looking at it or interested in potentially buying, right now you can rev things up and keep looking and hopefully find that extra special deal in winter. But if you are a person who's considering selling your home at the beginning of the season next year or at the perfect moment of the season next year, these are things you're going to want to think about as you go right now today. Because if you have a home that's a little bit challenging in terms of some of the features or it's super dated, you need to do the math to figure out if I do these changes, if I were to invest $100,000 in, which you could do through, there's a variety of ways you could potentially finance that as a HELOC or other types of things. That aside, getting the money to do the work aside, would you make more than you spend by doing these things? And that's the math. And that is where so many people drop the ball. So you need to work with an understanding of the market and be able to look at, and a lot of this you can do online. If you look at photos online in Zillow or Redfin or Trulia or Realtor.com, whatever you use, or if you use a realtor, and feel free to do that. I mean, I have a number of clients who are right now doing exactly this. They want to sell next year, so we all did a walkthrough through their house, and we just made notes of things that would encourage the house to sell faster and for more if they were changed. And then you just decide the level of change, right? In some cases, it's super small advice, like, okay, in this particular area of the house, replace all of the face plates for switches and plugs. And that, right? I mean, you can get a 20 pack of those things off Amazon for $15. So, a lot of that stuff is nothing stuff, but it gives, some of them are dented or cracked and all this kind of stuff. So, but you want them all to be the same. You don't want mix and matched face plates, right? Or at least you want all the plugs to be the same. You want all the wall switches to be the same. And maybe some of these switches need to be swapped out as well because they're really beat up. There could be a lot of little things like that. It can be as simple as a paint job. And 9 times out of I have loaned out my paint spray gun to a client who's going to be painting their own interior here over the next few months before we go on the market next year. But anyway, let's see what their list is, and I'll add my special sauce as we go. So first, establish clear objectives. I think that's kind of what we were just talking about. The point here is get an assessment of things that make sense to change. And start with curb appeal. Don't start at the front door. Start at the curb and think, what's going on in the front of this house that we can take care of to dazzle people when they're driving by? Because remember, there are several gates that will stop people from making an offer on your house. Number one, online presentation. How good are the photos? How good is the description? Do things you mention in the description of the property that are supposed to be awesome reflected in the photos? If they're not, punch your realtor in the face and make him send a photographer back out to if you are, and this is a particular frustration to me because I'm always looking at listings for homes and they'll say amazing view and then there's no photo of the view. Or they'll say amazing view and you go and there is no view unless you're standing on the roof, leaning off of the western end of the roof, peeking over some trees and some other houses. So, there's that to deal with too. A little bit more honesty in the listing might help. But anyway, figure out what your objectives are. And the objective for you is make changes that will make you money. And if I spend $1 on this change, I want to make $2 on the sales price, right? That just makes sense. Set a budget. I don't think there's any problem with this. It should be on a scale with how much you think you're going to make back, but you should absolutely have a spreadsheet on how much financial benefit each task means to you. And it depends on what holds value for you. In some cases, it might be a wash. In some cases, maybe doing that kitchen remodel will be a wash in terms of money, physical cash that you're going to make, but it might be a big player in how fast your home sells. Kitchens are huge, right? So I often will tell people, even if it's going to be a wash financially, even if you're going to spend $50,000 on that kitchen, but it's only going to make you $50,000 more in your ultimate sales price, odds on, the amount of time that you will save in selling that home makes it have an additional value above and beyond just, this is how much it'll cost me, right? So something to keep in mind as you go through. Plan thoroughly. Absolutely. You should ahead of time absolutely plan out everything that you're going to do. And you need to, if you're going to manage the process yourself, timing it correctly too. You want to make sure that the different vendors you're going to have come in to do different work don't undo the work of a previous vendor so that other vendor has to come back and unscrew what someone else did. So you got to do it in the right order, particularly if you're taking things down to studs. If you're doing a remodel where it's going to go down to studs, that you need to be particularly careful of that. And I would suggest for most of you, the best course of action is to actually have a contractor who's operating as the project manager for this so that it all gets done in the right order. Quality materials, this is a variable number, right? Is your home an upscale home? Because the bottom line is using tons of upscale bits in a home that's very middle of the road isn't going to get you as much money as it would if you had a home that was already in a upscale neighborhood, right? So it doesn't make sense for you to be the most expensively appointed home in a neighborhood, because the fact that you're in a neighborhood where you're the most expensively appointed is going to actually pull your price down a little bit, right? So use quality materials, but in context with what the property is that you're remodeling. Maximize space. So I get this one. It's particularly interesting to consider this option if you have a house that has a really funky layout, and boy does that happen a lot. I live in a community where all the homes are spec homes, right? There wasn't like 4 floor plans that all got built over and over again. Every single one of the homes in my community was designed by an architect where the owner person decided what should happen. And there's a home, I'm not going to call it out because if they ever, I've never had a neighbor tell me they listen to this show, but there is a house in my community where I've gone and walked through it, and it's actually been on the market several times over the years. And there's just areas that's like, what the hell were they thinking? There's like a narrow way to get into this weird little 3 foot by 3 foot space. So you couldn't actually fit anything in it. If you wanted to fit a chair in it, I guess you could buy a burrow chair and then assemble it in that little 3 foot by 3 foot area. But if it was put together, you couldn't get it out, kind of a thing. Just bizarre. And it had windows that were just a little too high. So you'd have to like get on your tiptoes to actually look at what is actually a halfway decent view. So just bizarre. Overcoming things like that, where if anyone ever stands in a place in your house and goes, what the hell is this space for? That's a problem you might want to solve. Next, ensure consistency. Yeah, I mean, you want to select a palette, right? You want to have a style in place. If you go craftsman throughout the whole place, going ultra modern somewhere else is gonna be a little bit off-putting, right? It's gonna disrupt the flow of the house. And whether or not buyers recognize it or not, it's subconsciously it's gonna register with them, and they're gonna walk away saying something felt off, something just didn't feel right in that house. Prioritize safety, sure. I mean that's always a thing. Return on investment. This instead of being op number 9, this should be number 1. Return on investment needs to be the number 1 thing, particularly if you're doing what I'm suggesting, using this list as here's things I'm going to do in preparation for selling my home in 2025. There is no standard list, no standard step-by-step specific list that's going to get you the results you need. This is a list you have to create for yourself. Feel free to bring in a knowledgeable partner. I consider myself to be one of those folks who could help you with that. Call me if you like. I'll be happy to walk through your house with you and help you identify things that you could do, and be willing to accept that unvarnished feedback. Good example, a property from a few years ago where someone had a mural pointed on their wall of like sort of if you were a fantasy person, right? This would be like a wood nymph on a lake, half naked with butterfly wings, painted like in the living room. And I've had several. I've had someone who had a fake tree built into their living room that came up out of the floor that was supposed to be like an elvish looking tree, like from Lord of the Rings. I've had some very interesting stuff. And I'm like, hey, this is a beautiful addition you've made. I'm sure it's enhanced your experience in the home. But I think we can both agree this is not a mass appeal feature. So we need to put some primer over that mural, and we need to paint the room to make it the thing that the largest number of people will want rather than the smallest number of people. So be prepared for that feedback. It's going to happen. All right. What else have we got? Weekly housing trends. This is the view for the week ending the 17th. Let's go down to their summary list here. Median price, listing price. I don't care. New listings up 11%, up 1.9 for this is year to date, up 11%. Week ending, so time on market 1 day slower, 7 days slower, 7 days slower, 7 days slower, and we actually see things selling faster in our market. It's just another indicator of how our market often completely goes the other direction from what the national averages are. But that's kind of what's happening nationally. And let's see, existing home sales rise 1.3%. Median sales price eases from seasonal peak. This is the total number of existing home sales with a drop here. So, and obviously we have our own numbers. We just covered them all. But it's very interesting to note that we're seeing this drop in home sales at the same time that we're seeing increases in inventory. So just something to keep in mind. The 10 best markets for your first house hack. So, house hacking is normally when you buy a property where you can live in part of it and rent out the other parts, like a duplex, right? Where you'd live in one and rent out the other one. I forget if they were, yes. house hacking there. So they're considering it in the same vein. It can also take the form, and this is something I like to encourage people to do, to think a little outside the box. When you're buying a home, is there room to add an ADU? Because you can frequently add an ADU to a property for under $70,000. So if all the prep work costs $10,000, you could then buy one of those boxable things, and those things cost $50,000. Plop it in your backyard and have it connected in a day, and you're done. Right? So if you've got a piece of property that could accommodate something like that, and consider quality of life, you don't probably want your renter parking in your driveway. Do you have a side driveway? Do you have a property that accommodates an RV on one side, right? Properties like that are perfect. If you've got like a little driveway, you could normally pull your RV up to the side of the house. You simply convert that into a secondary driveway for your renter, so you never have to deal with them, right? They park, they go, they do their thing, they rent, and you never have to worry about it. But let's look at the areas that they thought were so super interesting. And this is based on job growth, not a bad way to go. This one's Yakima, Washington. Again, I would be looking into how friendly are these folks for rentals. But again, the idea here is that you would buy and potentially rent out part of it. So you're able to get the preferential interest rate as a homeowner, as your primary residence loan, while having a rental element to it that could potentially pay your entire mortgage. Other places, Great Falls, Montana, Pocatello, Idaho. I like Idaho, and I'll tell you. So my 4,000-mile road trip I just did was basically from here all the way down to here, right? So my next road trip is going to be from here all the way up to here. And what I'm trying to do, obviously, this crazy 4,000-mile thing was not, I'm just going to look at markets. It was to get my son to Houston. But I ended up using it for that along the way, hitting communities where the people have told me they're moving to from California. And Idaho is on that list. Carson City and Reno are on that list. Las Vegas is on that list, but I'm not going to. I've been to Las Vegas enough times to know I don't want to go there. And for me, Las Vegas is too much of a one-horse town. It's too much of a people come here to gamble kind of thing, and it's one of the first things that goes by the wayside whenever a recession hits. So I prefer to go with markets that are a little bit more balanced. They have quite a few different businesses going on that keep everything floating, and if one gets diminished, it doesn't have a horrible impact on everything in that market. Anyway, so Pocatello, Idaho, and Great Falls, Montana, and Tucson, Arizona. So I went through here on my way to Houston. I went through here, and then on my way back, I went up here. I guess Tucson's all right. I mean, I like the fact that the median sales price is $247,000. From what I've been reading, there are interesting property problems. I don't think I could live there. If we're doing this as a house hack, I don't think I could live in Tucson. Then we've got El Paso, Texas. Couldn't do El Paso, Texas. Too hot for me. Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was surprised by how nice Albuquerque was going through it. I went through it on the way back when I was heading west. And a decent town. Still a little too hot for me, but if you look at the monthly PITI payment is $2,200 and the median sales price is $338,000. Job growth 2.52%. That's pretty slick. Brownsville, Harlington, again, just too freaking hot for me. You've got Springfield, Missouri. You've got Lakeland, Winter Haven, Florida, which is inland. And for me, the reasons to go to Florida, the reasons to live in Florida would be ocean related. So I wouldn't go for an inland area. I'd go for an area like this, Daytona Beach, Ormond, etc., or Gainesville. And then there's a lot of East Coast stuff. In my mind, if I'm talking to folks here, typically folks who are interested in investing don't want to go further east than, say, Mississippi. And a lot of them don't want to go further than one state over. So in other words, most of the folks I talk to are sort of in this area of interest. And I'm also kind of fascinated by the fact that we don't see anything in Nevada right here that is showing job growth, because I know that just south of Reno, there's been quite a bit of tech job growth as it relates to Amazon buildings of some facilities there and whatnot. But anyway, I wanted to share that with everyone because I don't think it makes sense to definitely take into consideration these kinds of economic factors relating to job growth and those kinds of things when you're shopping for that first investment property. That's one I was going to say for something else. We don't need to talk about that one. But this is a show, Bigger Pockets, that if you're starting late in life, I had a client who's actually in their late 50s, early 60s, who was considering starting. They had a pretty good chunk of capital they wanted to invest, and so this is something I was going to forward to them. Next, let's talk about the 30-year mortgage. As always, I like to run a quick, here's what's going on if you wanted to get a mortgage in Morgan Hill. This same number will apply to just about anywhere in Santa Clara County. So even though it says Morgan Hill, if you were to put a San Jose zip code in there, these numbers are going to stay the same. We can see that if you assume great credit and you're putting down 20%, 6.423% is the APR with $4,400 in fees. What's our average sales price in Morgan Hill? Average sales price $1.5 million. So let's kick this up to 1.5. Whoops. Now, what you're going to notice is our options drop and interest rates are higher and fees are higher. But now, so if we're paying an average price in Morgan Hill, now let's up this to 25%. And you can see that now we're much better off. 6.013, 2,812, giving us lowest monthly payments. And then if we go up to 30%, look at that, 5.898%. So the amount you have to put down is a huge factor, and consider that when you're doing this, if you can buy if you have obviously a fixed amount of cash you can put into a transaction, being willing to abandon, say, that more expensive market for a less expensive market like Gilroy, where the house will cost you less and therefore you're able to put a higher percentage down. Over the longer term, you can get sub 6% interest rates, depending on how much you've got, right? So take that math into consideration. Don't just go with, well, interest rates are now so high that I need to move down to Morgan Hill or I need to move down to Gilroy. Even if you're okay with potentially paying in San Jose, take into consideration stuff like this, where you're going to get a far more lucrative loan and terms that over the long haul is going to save you a lot more money. So just stuff to consider as you are making your way through. And finally, my pitch for my stuff. This is my website, soldbyrobert.com. If you would like to check out the interview with the folks from Pacific Legal. Let's see here. We can do a quick search and just do Pacific Legal. And there we go. Home equity theft interview with Christina Martin. She was the lead lawyer for the home equity case in the Supreme Court. Super proud to have had her on the show. She was great. She was very forthcoming, but feel free to check that out. So literally a year ago when they won that case. So very, very happy to have had them on the show, and I'd love to have them on again. But if you want to come here, one thing that I like to tout, and I realize this is me doing the self-plug, so I apologize, but this is a unique tool, right? You can obviously get what you get everywhere else, which is a free home value estimate. And this tends to be the most accurate, right? Zillow tends to be a little off. Trulia and Zillow share an engine in terms of the algorithm that they use to determine value. Redfin tends to be a little different. But when I list a home and I check it against this, I tend to see this is closer to right than those other tools. But what's in addition to that, and if you never plan on selling your home, use this tool, because it's going to give you a whole bunch of other stuff. While it does give you the value estimator, it's also going to give you how much equity you have, different options you have, and options to explore actually engaging with these. So I've partnered with a local lender right here in Morgan Hill who, if you click on any of these, you can talk to them. So if you bought another home, how much could you afford? Purchase a new home, buy an investment property, rent your home and buy another home, sell and pocket the cash. So these are all things you can explore and get more details on each one. What could a refi save you in interest? This is a great tool, and it's red because it's telling you don't do it. If you're, and it tells you which one, and all the X's tell you don't do it. It understands what rates are right now. It understands all of this stuff. And it also tells you if you pay X amount of dollars more each month, how much would you save over the course of your loan? So it obviously says $250, but there's more options available. What you've paid so far in your mortgage towards interest. What's important now. Thinking of selling, you have 3 strong selling signals. In this case, it's 3. You might have up to $1.44 million in purchasing power for a new home. You could use about $144,000 of equity if you feel ready for if you want to feel like you're ready for anything that might come your way. Quick check. We found these loans from public records. All of this stuff is available to you, and these are just great tools. This is one if you decide you want to do monthly or daily rentals, whatever. They're just great tools for you to figure out what you might want to do with the equity you've accumulated in your property. So this isn't just a tool I can offer for you to figure out what your home's value might be. It's a great tool for you to just do what-if scenarios and figure out how you might tap into your equity to help it make it work for you. All right. That's about it, folks. I think we've covered everything. There's my big ugly mug on the front of my webpage. And of course, if you want to start a search for a home, you can do that right there as well on the front page. So feel free to check that out. All right, we're at 11:15 just now. Thanks again for checking in with me. I saw we had a few folks come in from YouTube. We had one from, it looks like we had a couple of folks watching on X. I can't verify that one though, because those folks can't comment. Didn't get any good questions or didn't get any questions this time around, but look forward to seeing some next time. And make sure to join me on the 3rd Saturday of September as we do this again and review all the latest news and numbers for Santa Clara County. Again, my name is Robert Whitelaw, local licensed real estate broker and realtor. Thanks for spending your time with me Saturday morning today, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a good one.